host for this evening, Stephanie Grilly. But before we get underway for our guest and our human experience program tonight, I'd like to hand it over to the chair of the Alumni to Alumni Committee of the Board of Governors, Jeff Feldman, so that he can welcome you to and tell you about our program, Thursday night programs, Must See Yalies. Jeff.
Hey Stephanie, thanks, and welcome everybody again. This just keeps getting better every week. We get more people coming. We get the same people coming. It's really getting to be a nice little community, and thank you for joining. We're really excited. So we do call it Must See Yale. There's plenty of people out there, alumni, doing amazing things, and we're hearing all about these things as we go. We have upcoming shows every Thursday at 8 o'clock. You're welcome to join. We encourage you to join us, and we cover various topics along the way, but it's the same link every week. These are tonight's show. We have next week's show, which is a STEM report on science technology. Then we go back to career pivots with a GSAA networking event. In February 11th, we have life and personal growth. So these are our 4 rolling shows. We have episodes. Just come. We're having a great time. Quick on formatting. We try to go 15, 20 minutes, get some insight from the guests. The host here, Stephanie, will take us through it. But if you have questions, it works best if you either chat them or just raise your hand and ask. The more interjections, it's actually a little bit more fun for people to hear from other folks on the call. So enjoy yourselves and come back again next week. The other one, I just want to introduce Steve Bloom. Steve Bloom's key person, and he's going to talk about cross-campus, another place and another way to stay involved and get more involved with the Yale alumni community. Steve, you want to give us a minute and then we'll kick off?
Sure, this will be real quick because I think we should get to the main course tonight, but thank you all for being here tonight. As many of you may know, we launched about 9 months ago an online community called Cross Campus, and already more than 15,000 of your fellow Yalies, both students and alums, have joined Cross Campus. It's a wonderful place to navigate, to find other people, sometimes to find people who might want to speak at an event that you're interested in, to find people with a common interest. I would encourage you to join Cross Campus, which you see on your screen there. It's very easy to find. It's crosscampus@yale.edu. So do join, find your fellow Yalies, and find somebody with whom you can network, give or gain advice, or mentor. Thanks a lot.
So are we ready to start talking to our distinguished guest this evening, Charles Eisenstein, who I am delighted agreed to be our guest, or as we like to think of them, discussion leader. When I asked Charles, I mean, I knew that he would be appropriate to perhaps where some of our heads are these days, but quite honestly, I didn't really think as to the exact timing vis-a-vis some of the current changes that have happened, of just how fitting and his topic and what he's going to bring and share with us this evening might be. I'm not going to spend a lot of time introducing Charles because we want to get into the nitty-gritty of discussion, but also, as with many of these presentations, the pathway and the journey of the guest is just as much a part of what the guest is going to talk about. So nobody will be able to talk better about Charles's life than Charles. So I'm going to keep my comments and my introduction brief. Charles is an '89 graduate of Yale College. Ezra Stiles, as I believe. While he was at Yale, he was a mathematics and philosophy major, but by his own admission that something just didn't quite sit right in terms of what he was studying for and what at that time his goals may have been. After Yale, he went to Taiwan, lived there for 9 years and was a translator. And when he came back to the States, the frustrations became more and more something that could not be ignored. And in one of his many aha moments, sat down and wrote a book called The Ascent of Humanity, which took 4 years to write. And then he went on to write several other books, including Sacred Economics, in which he discussed, among other things, the gift economy, which is something he himself subscribes to. Then the book that is the title of our event tonight, The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible. And then most recently, Climate, A New Story. You can also go to his website, charleseisenstein.org, and find essays, videos, and podcasts. But I also invite you to Google Charles and you will find an embarrassment of riches in terms of his thought, which some have called revolutionary. Speaking at places such as the Omega Institute, SLN, and we are delighted that he is going to speak tonight to the Yale alumni. So kicking it off, Charles, I would like to ask you just a question that I hope that you can run with. If in fact you can't share, and I'm going to back up. I'm going to interrupt myself, which I do often. As people have said, if you put your question in the chat, at some point when we start rolling into the questions, I'll call upon you to ask your question personally to Charles. So going back to you now, Charles. Sorry about my own interruption. If in fact you could share with us your journey to Yale, from Yale, and how you have, well, and what brought you to the way of your thought that you have put in those books.
Well, thank you, Stephanie, for such a kind and generous introduction. I'm feeling it's strange, to step into the Yale world. I've spent so much of my life kind of outside of mainstream institutions, shall we say, to be generous to myself. And and I know that, or my impression is that, Yale education, and you get a job in the high status professions and elite institutions of our culture. And I didn't do that. And so I'm just noticing my desire to somehow establish my intelligence or my accomplishments. So I'm just going to let go of that, and I'll just take your invitation to say a little bit about how I came to do this. I kind of drifted into Yale. I wasn't ready for it. I was young for my grade and young for my age, if that makes sense. 17 years old, stepping from a small town public high school, and was totally overwhelmed by the place and socially very isolated. And that was such a bigger issue to me. My social situation and my unhappiness loomed much larger on my mental landscape than academic matters. But nonetheless, I did study mathematics and philosophy because I was seeking an answer to a question that I had not yet put into words. Later, I understood the question to be, what is the origin of the wrongness that I sense in the world? That it was a feeling that had grown throughout my youth, not only because of the books that I read. My father was political and you know, a left political, he was a political scientist actually. And so I was reading Silent Spring and Gulag Archipelago and The People's History of the United States and so forth when I was a teenager. And also, my father was a vehement critic of the Vietnam War, and I was aware that there was something wrong in the world. But also just my daily experience sitting in classrooms, filling out worksheets, thinking, this doesn't make sense. As I'm seeing on television images of the Ethiopian famine, like, this doesn't make sense. Something doesn't add up here, and it's a beautiful day, and why can't I be outside? And why am I learning this stuff? And so this was this inchoate protest, almost rebellion or repudiation of the world offered to me to live. So I wanted to understand, why are things the way that they are? So in our culture, the deepest answers, the foundational pillars of knowledge, that's mathematics and philosophy. So maybe the answers are there. And so I studied, I've studied that at Yale, and focusing on foundations, mathematical foundations, set theory, logic theory. And I didn't, and then, in philosophy as well, I didn't find the answers that I was secretly hoping for. Instead, I found what was to me kind of a repulsive subculture of intellectual hair splitting. At least, and I don't want to dismiss an entire discipline of thought, but to me, it didn't seem like it was really about the real stuff, So I graduated, and as you said, I just left. I just jumped off the entire success trajectory. Didn't apply to graduate school, didn't apply to medical school, didn't apply to the Foreign Service, didn't apply to the Peace Corps, didn't build my resume. And I just went back to Taiwan, where I had visited in my sophomore year because I was so miserable and I wanted to get away. So yeah, and in Taiwan, I had experiences that confirmed another secret suspicion that I had, that what I had been offered as reality, the domain of what's real and possible, was much too narrow, much narrower than what is actually real and possible. And these experiences came in the form of psychedelics, of encounters with Taoism, and kind of like local folk Taoism, the shamanic roots of that culture, experiences with Chinese medicine, with Qigong, that just didn't fit into reality. And here I was, coming from an institution that represents the pinnacle of intellectual or even epistemic development. Like, here is where knowledge is the most advanced, yet there are huge realms of experiences that were not on the syllabus in any of my classes, that were not in the blue book. I don't know if they still have a blue book, but these were not there. They were totally out of bounds. So I began to incorporate these exiled domains of knowledge into I guess you could say, kind of an independent course of study. And I'm not sure how long you want me to go on with the story, but it's weird, like talking to a screen where, like, I don't even know if people are yawning and stuff. I used to be a public speaker. I mean, this is my career up until last year, Anyway.
We're all here, don't worry.
All right, we're here. Okay, so yeah, I I came back to the States, you know, and with ideas of raising my new family in the suburbia that I grew up in, which for all its faults, at least there were gangs of kids playing outside, riding bikes together, and there was nothing of the kind. There weren't any kids outside anymore. All there was a blue glow coming from each living room and sporadic play dates. And that was the time where where the answer to that question, what is the origin of the wrongness in the world, crystallized. And I came to understand that it is, and the answer always transcends the question and sometimes obviates the question. But the initial crystallization was, oh, all of what I'm seeing, from ecological ruin to the direction of agriculture, the political situation, technology, genocide, racism, I mean, all of the ills of the world, these are all expressions of what I called separation, coming from the deep mythology of our civilization, the defining stories that tell us who we are, what a self is, why we're here, where we came from, where we're going. Like, that's what a mythology answers. And our society, which imagines itself to have transcended mythology, is actually living in a mythology that includes metaphysical precepts like objectivity, reductionism, and so forth. So these were some of the threads that I pulled together into the book that you mentioned, Stephanie, The Ascent of Humanity. And, you know, there I was. I mean, who was I? You know, I was, had no academic training. I hadn't gone to grad school. You know, I wrote this 600-page book. So with grandiose imaginings that the sheer brilliance of it would make me rich and famous. And of course, you can guess what happened. Couldn't find a publisher. No agent would touch it. I self-published it, went bankrupt, and ended up as a single dad with 3 little boys, barely, you know, able to feed them. And anyway, maybe I'll stop my life story there. Eventually, people started to notice it, and my writing spoke to at least a small corner, a large enough corner of our culture that I was able to make a living. And
so Charles, do you want to, you know, I hate to, you know, sort of reduce your many ideas into, if you know, a few thoughts, but can you tell those gathered tonight sort of the crux of this idea of the story of separation, and how the alternative for you is this idea of interbeing?
Yeah. So the story of separation, or the mythology, you know, it says that who you are is a separate self in a world of other. In philosophy, it's the Cartesian mode of consciousness. In biology, it's the phenotypic expression of the genes, especially the nuclear DNA. In economics, it's Adam Smith's economic man seeking to maximize rational self-interest. In psychology, it's this kind of skin-encapsulated ego. In religion, it's the soul encased in flesh. All of these different expressions of what a person is all share in common that you're separate. And another dimension of it is humanity as separate from nature, something apart from nature. And a third thread of this narrative is the idea that full selfhood exists in human beings alone, and that animals, plants, rocks, clouds, rivers, the sky, the sun, these are not beings. They are just stuff. They're just the things. They are random combinations of generic building blocks. And because we are in that sense alone in the universe, our destiny, our manifest destiny, is to become its lords and possessors. And that human progress lies in insulating ourselves from the arbitrary forces of nature and harnessing them to our benefit. So that way of seeing nature as just a bunch of stuff is central to the destruction of nature, because it doesn't have inherent value, only instrumental value. So, or I could apply, so that was what, so then I apply it to medicine and the war on the germ, or apply it to politics, the idea of security through the domination of an other, like this basic mentality. I mean, we see it in politics today, where the solution to a problem, our political problem, is to win victory over the other side. So anyway, or especially I apply it to the money system too, describing, that was sacred economics, describing how the way that the agreement that we call money, which is simply the assignment of value to symbols. So you could say money itself is a story, how that story embodies both separation in that it generates competition, and also an embodiment of ascent, of domination of growth, because our current money system requires economic growth in order to function. So like, that's the kind of way I applied it. And then anyway, just to try to make it shorter, the basic thesis is that the story of separation and the systems built upon that generate crises that eventually bring down the story, and that we are living in a time where our old story of separation and all that rests upon it is disintegrating.
So you would, how do you approach the crises that we are currently experiencing then?
Yeah, like right now we can see, like the dissolution of the story of America the Great, land of the free, home of the brave. One way that the story is disintegrating is by the surfacing of the histories of indigenous people, the genocides, of slavery, of racism, of imperialism. Like all of these stories rising to the surface puncture the bubble of that story. So that's one level. Also the dysfunction of our economic system. The story that if you work hard, you're going to be better off than your parents. The story that if you go to the doctor, you'll be healthy. If you do as you're told, you'll be healthy, and the doctor can fix it. We have, over my lifetime, a precipitous rise in autoimmune diseases and other chronic conditions that modern medicine can really just palliate. So these are ways that the story breaks down, and that breakdown then creates the space for a new story to arise, which I like to use Thich Nhat Hanh's term for it, interbeing, which narrates the self in a much different way. It says we are interconnected, interdependent, interexistent, that what happens to the world happens to me inescapably, that any relationship that I have mirrors something in myself, that it includes a different principle of change, morphic resonance, that a change that happens in one place creates a field of change, so that the same change happens elsewhere too, even if you can't identify the causal mechanism. It's the intuition that even if we could compensate technologically for the loss of the rainforests by installing machines to pump carbon dioxide out of the air, and we could bleach the sky white with sulfur aerosols to reduce sunlight and maintain a constant temperature. Even if we could do that, if the rainforests die, something in us dies as well. That if there are people in destitution in this world, none of us can actually be rich. What is actual wealth? It is a feeling of belonging. It's a feeling of security. It's a feeling of being at home here. It's a feeling that can only come through rich, robust relationships. Same thing with health. Health is not really possible in an isolation bubble. And a lot of the new sciences and new thinking validate this idea. Like, oh, actually, you need a healthy microbiome and you need healthy social relationships. The biggest predictor of chronic disease is loneliness, of early death, loneliness. You're much better off smoking and drinking and having a rich social life than you are being an abstemious loner. So this understanding that who we are is relational is emerging from, well, at least in my hopeful moments, I see it emerging from the debris of the story and systems of separation. Okay, so
at this time, if you know this separation is key, perhaps we've never been more polarized. How do you suggest we begin to move beyond polarized conversations, or even have conversations?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that it comes from, there's a, excuse me. Yeah, first I want to just say that that is a crucial question of our time. Unless you think that a better society will come when the good guys finally overcome the bad guys and kick them out and re-educate them and destroy them. Unless you think that, and if you do think that, hey, I mean, that's what Hollywood has been drilling into us for a long time. Most action movies exemplify the idea that the solution to the problem is to find and destroy the bad guy. So the programming is strong, but we have to overcome that programming and ask a key question, which is, what is it like to be you? Because so part of the story of separation is the dehumanization of other people. To make somebody in your eyes less than fully human or less human than yourself, to apply epithets to them like stupid, ignorant, immoral, narcissistic, evil, lazy. I mean, just go to, comments on Facebook on any controversial topic, and you will see a good display of dehumanizing sentiments. That prevents, anytime that we dehumanize a person or a group, we no longer can understand the situation from which their behavior arises.
Steph, real quick, I see a bunch of questions in the chat. Maybe let those folks engage.
Yeah, maybe we should.
Joshua, Joshua Olesker, you had a question, or maybe in fact your question is shifted since you first put it in the chat. Jonathan, are you here?
I'm here, Joshua. Hello. Hi, everybody. This is a great big treat. And hi, Charles. I don't think I'm class of '89 too. We didn't know each other. And Liam Montanarelli is here. And I'm so glad to see Liam. And I just have to give a shout out. Danny Kasoy is here too. Someone from the class of '87. We were in the Alley Cats together. I haven't seen Danny in years. So this is just awesome on that level. But Charles, you know, I've actually seen your face and name listed on a bunch of, you know, I of course have my own, you know, story of my life that I believe in, but I also left the track of obvious world domination in search of a better feeling and orientation to life. And among other things, that took me off to study world religions in graduate school, and later on to Advaita Vedanta and a bunch of wonderful teachers, including a guy named Rupert Spira, who I saw listed on a science and non-duality conference next to you.
Yeah.
And I wonder if I just wonder, essentially how you engender well-being in your own life. You know, I listen, it's wonderful to listen to you articulate these points. It feels exactly like Yale to be in this room, virtual room, because of your magnificent articulateness. But also, I just wonder about, you know, how these tools can get us there, as opposed to, I mean, for instance, do you meditate? Have you, like, how have you enacted well-being in your life, in concentric circles, starting at the very center,
Yeah.
if you have?
Yeah. So I hope you're not laboring under the assumption that I am especially notably successful in nurturing well-being in my life.
I don't know. I mean, you know,
But,
you were talking about the wrongness of the paradigm, and it's totally understandable. I couldn't agree more. And at the same time, you know, I mean, for example, in my own life, when I mean, forgive me for adding any of my story, but just as an illustration, I got out of college in '89 and went to work in network television news, not knowing any better, and realized that I didn't want to be like any of those grown-ups at all. They were I was like, oh my God, this is absolutely not it. And I had no idea how to be or where to go, because I mean, I'm from New York, a whole world of culture that venerated Yale, etc. And it struck me that the people who seemed well when I looked around were people like the Dalai Lama or
yeah.
Mother Teresa. And it didn't matter what religious tradition they were from. If they were very advanced practitioners of that tradition, they tended to seem quite well. I wasn't sure that they were well, but I went to look. And and here I've found you on these posters from the SAND conference talking about these things. And so I can't help but, I'm excited to make contact with you live for the first time. And I wonder how you're doing. And
yeah, well, thank you. Yeah. You know, I mean, I do some meditation and stuff, but I'm not like, you know, somebody who has a really impressive practice and gets up at 4 a.m. and does 3 hours of meditation or something. I don't have any, you know, special intense practices. To the extent that I am well, it is because of relationships. It's because of the way I'm held by community. It's because of my gardening, you know, my participation on my brother's farm, my family, my friends. And I have to say, it's been really hard in the last year, where so many of these relationships have been cut off.
Yeah.
And you know, the public health response to COVID exemplifies an aspect of the story of separation that holds risk minimization and the postponement of the death of the separate self as a cardinal value above values of association, of togetherness, of, like, it kind of trumps everything else.
Interesting
do what
verb,
it takes
yes.
to reduce, yeah, right, trumps everything else. Do everything it takes to minimize your risk of death and illness. And I think that's been really hard for a lot of people. And I think maybe one of the good things that'll come out of this is that when we're able to go back to normal, we're at least going to ask, well, what aspects of normal do we want to go back to, and what do we not? What is really precious and sacred about the world that we had? And I hope I am working for us holding the value precious of singing together, dancing together, performing arts, group hugs, weddings, funerals, festivals. Like, do we want a world without that if it keeps us a little safer? From the value set of separation, yes, because the separate self is all that there is. But when we understand ourselves as more than a skin encapsulated ego, when we understand ourselves as relational beings, as diffusing in our beingness through into the world and past the world, then death avoidance no longer is the most important thing. It's not unimportant, but other values emerge, and we can guide our private and collective lives according to those other values. So that's, anyway, I just took your question and diverted it onto my, but
So
Totally fine.
So Lisa, is it Lisa Brand? Didn't ask a question, but she posted Tikkun Olam, which I know is a concept in Judaism.
Tikkun Olam.
Tikkun Olam, right? Jeff, do you want to explain what it, or Lisa, are you still here?
Lisa, chime in. She had.
Yeah, hi. Sorry, I
Lisa.
had my video off on purpose, but
Okay.
I'll look at my disheveled self. No, as I have listened to Charles, that's what came to mind, that this idea that the world is broken and that we are here to repair it. It doesn't encapsulate everything you've said, but it certainly resonated for me. And it's a value that has guided my whole life. So, and certainly my relationships with other people.
yes.
So,
Yeah.
if it's relevant, I asked because of Josh's question about a spiritual framework, and that's one that's been helpful for me.
Yes, I think it's super relevant because when the story of separation's offering of what is a life for, why are we here, wavers and fails, that question becomes that question rises to urgency. Why am I here? And if it's not to maximize my self-interest, to survive and reproduce, to swell in my control over the world, what is it? Why are we here collectively and individually? And it can only be if we know ourselves as relational interbeings, then of course it is to serve life and beauty on earth, because whatever we serve is part of ourselves as well. There's no separation between what is good for the world and what ultimately enriches me as well. So the idea of the world is broken, it speaks to the sense that of a purpose and a contribution that is called forth by circumstances in relation to the unique set of gifts that we are born with and that we acquire. And on some level, the world isn't broken. Like there's a larger story here in which the brokenness of the world is an evolutionary necessity, in which the course of separation is a purposeful journey so that we come back into a greater unity enriched by the journey. That the effort, the engagement with a broken world is a necessary initiation to come into the next stage of humanity. So there's you could look at it in these, metaphysical terms, but none of those are meant to distract from the truth of the world is broken. And therefore we are here to serve its repair. So yeah, thank you for invoking that.
Brennan Hackett, with your Yale poster behind you, I mean, your Yale banner behind you. You had a question for Charles.
Yeah, that's a total coincidence. I wasn't planning on turning the video, but yeah, my question, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. Thanks for speaking. I think your life story is very interesting. Frankly, I wish I had the same discoveries when I was in college, because I went to law school, worked in New York, and, you know, pursued the money and career, and it's a total toxic waste of my life. And wish I never did, and have been trying to, for the past decade, to try to find my way in between the programming of my entire childhood, which was around this nonsense consumerism garbage and status, and I don't need to go further, you know what I mean? And then, but then trying to find my own way in a way that makes sense, and then watching everybody who were very close friends from Yale mostly sort of fall away, looking at me like I'm crazy because they're still obsessed with such surface issues. Anyway, one of the only reasons I've been able to stay sane is through synchronicities. And when you mentioned, to remind me that there's a little bit something deeper going on, and you mentioned the importance of interconnection, and you know, synchronicity just came to mind. So I wonder if speak at all.
Well, thank you. I'm actually kind of moved by the little snippet of your story that you told. And
thanks.
I'm like, oh man, I don't want you to feel like you wasted all those years, you know, the money chase, the law school, because I have this, I would call it a pretty clear knowing that in order for humanity to repair itself and the world, in order for us to weave back together in a story of reunion, every path must be walked. Every life story must be fulfilled. Some of us are born very deep into separation, and it's a long journey back. And others are maybe not born so deep into it. Maybe some people are born to hippie parents who, you know, raised them on organic food and in the soil and in the woods, and maybe their journey back to healing, to wholeness, is a different one than yours. But I want to honor the journey from the mad consumerism and the success orientation and the money and stuff, like to go from that, to walk that trail, to leave that behind when there's, you know, 100 arms tugging at you, trying to pull you back into it, telling you that you're crazy, telling you that you're naive, that you're irresponsible, that it's not practical, that it can't be done, that no one does this. To like emerge from that, you're doing a service not only to yourself, but also to everybody else who is stuck in that, because you're creating a template for their emergence from a world that doesn't actually fulfill them either. So yeah, I would just, you know, hope that you honor the journey that you've taken. And as for the synchronicities, those tend to happen in the transition between stories. Because when you let go of controlling your life and you step into the unpredictable realm, there's room for a larger intelligence to act. And the outcroppings of that larger intelligence take the form of synchronicities. And you realize that you don't actually have to control as much as you thought. Because, I mean, if there's no intelligence in the world, then of course you have to control everything for anything good to happen. But what if there's an unfolding order and beauty beyond ourselves? Then our choices are no longer about controlling. Our right action starts with listening, tuning in, recognizing what is mine to do in this situation, and accepting the guidance. And I'm not talking about anything supernatural necessarily. It's the guidance of the heart that makes us care about something and gives us that feeling, yes, this is the right thing to do. And I don't know how I know that. And when we step onto that, it's like, I can't remember one of the Indiana Jones movies, you know, where he's maybe it was the first one where he steps, like each step is into the abyss, but like something comes under his foot right as he steps. Like that kind of walk, we can be carried by these synchronicities. So, and probably a lot of people have, you may have noticed that like it's when you step into the unknown that you start having synchronicities. When you move to a new city and you don't have a plan and you meet just the right person at that time and things kind of come together. Those are signals from a much bigger world than the world of force-based causality.
Charles,
educated.
Unbelievable show. You got so many questions going on. We're down about 10 minutes. I just thought I'd interject or let Stephanie. There's a couple of really interesting comments or
Well,
questions.
we have at least one more question from Daniel.
Yeah, I mean, Michelle Stein had an interesting point too. Maybe we get to her.
Yeah.
We may have to have you back.
Thanks, Stephanie. Charles, very inspiring, delightful conversation. Thanks for opening up everyone's minds. My question was very specific. Do you know Charles Taylor, the philosopher from McGill, by any chance?
No, don't know.
Okay, well, anyway, you might be interested. I'm reading this big tome, A Secular Age, and he talks about how in the Middle Ages, when
Oh, we lost you.
Yeah.
Oh, you just got muted somehow.
Sorry, yeah. He talked in the Middle Ages when God was a part of everybody's life. It was not even it's like oxygen. You wouldn't even ever conceive of God not being involved. He described people as porous. And you just a while ago talked about how, you know, when we extend beyond the shell that we have in the skin around us, to later when God has kind of been sidelined and we become humanists and secular, that he calls us buffered selves. So I just wondered whether it sounded very much like what you talk about in terms of separation.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the water is rising from many springs. So there's many people articulating this idea in different ways. There's, you know, extended self, extended cognition. I mean, there's many ways to express the understanding that we are not these rigid, discrete, separate beings, which is something that you already know when you look into somebody's eyes and see the same being looking back at you. Like this is something we know.
Yeah, and just to very momentarily share, I mean, I'm a physician, a surgeon for years, but did it in a slightly different way. And I am now actually finding myself separating from what increasingly appears to me to be something I don't quite understand in the way that it happens and why I've done it. So just, it sounds like from reading the chat, a lot of people are having this experience from establishment kind of constructs to something very different.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Michelle Stein. Are you still here, Michelle?
I am. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Charles. My question was, I really was touched by the point in your story where you talked about the low point, about going bankrupt and not getting anybody to buy your book. And, you know, you had no way to support your children. You know, I think a lot of us on here can relate to the fact that it's very hard to take risks sometimes, to follow that small, still voice, right? That there was sort of this movement of you should be following your passion. And if you follow your passion, then things will line up for you and you'll be able to afford your life that you need to live, right? But that's a very difficult risk. And I think somebody else said it in the chat too, like taking risks like you have with your life is very challenging for a lot of us. And I was wondering how you integrate for yourself, you know, that push and pull of I'm in the world, but not of it, right? Like I have to support myself and my family, but there's something calling me. And I know for myself professionally, I have found myself sort of just being pulled along on a certain trajectory. I live a very comfortable life, but if you ask me, am I passionate about my work? I don't really think I am. There's this other thing that calls to me that I don't really know how I would support my family, or, you know, be willing to take the risk of going to do something that may not support my family. So I was wondering how you integrated that, or what became, you know, after that part of your story.
You know, I mean, part of it was just youthful naivete, but also, like, yeah, right now you're not willing to take the risk, but what if something seized you that you cared about so much that you just couldn't put it down, or it wouldn't put you down? If that happened, maybe you would take those risks.
Right.
So it's not about heroic measures. Like, I didn't feel especially heroic. I just had really no choice. Like, I tried at various times to fit in to the program, but I couldn't make myself do it. Even at Yale, like, I would procrastinate. I would self-sabotage. Like, I literally could not comply with what I had to do. So.
Right. I also think it's interesting. I know we're kind of out of time, but this idea, you know, there's some people, like I grew up as a child of immigrants, right? Like, my parents' work was just work, right? Like, if my mom was cleaning people's houses to make a living, that wasn't her passion necessarily, but it was what we did so that we had to do it. So there's also, as you were talking about, you know, just different parts of the world that you lived in and things, like, I just feel like there is a certain level of privilege that we bring even to this conversation, right? Like, you know, there's so many layers to this to think about and talk about, but I thought about that too, as you were speaking, you know, like, the fact that we can even have this conversation shows a certain level of privilege too, I think.
You know, I have a friend who lives in a favela in Brazil. He told me a story. Like, I'm saying the story because this is not something that only privileged people can exercise. He told me about his uncle, it was, who, like, I mean, these people were destitute, but his uncle, whenever he somehow got a little extra money, he would use it to buy musical instruments and give them to the kids in the favela. And this is not somebody who has a savings account. This is all the money he has. And he uses it to buy musical instruments for the kids in the favela.
Yeah.
Like, people in every circumstance do that. And there's always a barrier. There's always a guardian at the threshold that says, is it safe? Will I be okay? And sometimes maybe you don't pass that guardian, and you learn that maybe it's like, this is what happened with my book, The Ascent of Humanity. The hard circumstances were actually a huge blessing, because they clarified in me that, in fact, I wasn't just doing it for the money and the fame that I imagined that I might receive. Like, the universe posed me the question, do you care about this for real? Or is it just for its instrumental utility in your life? So there's a generosity in that as well. Anyway, could be a long conversation, and I know we're out of time, but.
Yeah, well, on that, Charles, it's, you're the guest up to. We're getting a lot of requests to continue. I'm just one voice. For those who need to get off at 9, you know, I actually have to get off at 9, but go if you're willing to stay, or Stephanie and Steve, if you want to keep going.
I could stay a little while. Yeah.
Okay, because I was even going to say, I didn't even, it's actually, we're just, I feel like almost like right now, we're just even starting to get to where what we want to talk about.
Steve, what do you think? Steve, going?
Stephanie, if you're on, why don't you make, I'm sorry, Chelsea, if you're on, why don't you make either Stephanie or Jeff the host?
It makes Stephanie, Chelsea, because I've got to run myself. But
Okay.
Yeah, you struck a nerve, Charles. I mean, this is
Right.
in the trade unprecedented, you know. So just keep going. You're changing some lives around. I think.
I see. We're going to lose the recording when we do that, Stephanie.
Okay. And then the other option, Victoria has brought it up. Victoria Sue's brought it up. And I don't want to put you on the spot now, Charles. But it's almost like we'd like to almost ask you back, but maybe that's asking too much.
It's not asking too much. This is my work that I like to do. But I feel like we have some momentum now. So if there's a way to continue.
So we don't have, I guess, yeah, we can stay on and we don't have to keep recording.
Chelsea actually offered to stay on. So why don't you just continue?
Okay.
Thanks.
And if some people bow out, I want to bring people's attention also to Rob Greenlee. Is he still here?
Hi.
Rob,
Yes.
do you want to tell people when your event is next month?
Yeah, I mentioned,
Yep.
I think to Daniel. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
On February 11th, it's on the personal leadership. I'm going to be doing a session on leading your life and career on purpose, and the idea is it's pales in comparison to Charles, but having had an experience that changed my life and then made me think about what does it mean for me to be a leader of my own life and career, and how can we apply that to our own, those principles of leadership to our own lives and careers, so that we're actually leading ourselves instead of just managing things. So same date, same time, Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern, it's February 11th.
Okay. Thanks,
I've
Rob.
calendared it. Thank you.
So Victoria, do you want to jump in and ask a question now?
I didn't have a specific question, but I definitely a lot of the things that Charles was saying, I kind of I feel it. There's a lot of emotional connection, spiritual connection, I guess. But I was thinking about, I think, Michelle's question, and was just thinking that I think a lot of times there's a little voice that we don't. Sorry, this is my daughter, Mari.
That's your little voice.
Yeah. Some little voices we hear, some little voices we don't hear as well. And but it's I think it's part of connection that the storytelling of others, actually helps us to hear our own voice. It helps to strengthen us and uncover our own ability to go in and try to find something authentic. So, I'll stop there.
Okay. Let's see. And is it not Victoria? Where?
Right, do we put a hand up or just keep chatting?
Yeah. Who?
Anyone has questions or just keep chatting?
Let me see. I saw somebody else had a question. Olivia.
Evan?
Olivia didn't have a question so much.
And Evan has a question.
Evan.
Yeah,
Okay. Evan.
Sure. Charles, obviously very inspired by your story. And I love the idea of not vanquishing people on the other side. I think that's a really powerful thing. But I do think that we need to figure out we do have an enormous amount of privilege because of our education. Many of us are involved in work that we don't just do to eat, but we are engaged with our work. We love our work and COVID has accelerated the inequality between people who have and people who don't have material comfort. And a lot of those people who are leading having shorter life expectancies, dying deaths of desperation in drugs and alcohol, are turning to these really destructive historical tropes like racism or white supremacy or QAnon conspiracies. And have you given any thought for what we do to help those people or even those people in our own families?
Yeah. In fact, I published an essay about a month ago, I think it was, on QAnon. It was called QAnon, A Dark Mirror, where I basically said, yeah, it's easy to rip on QAnon, but why? why do they believe those things? Like actually why? You know, not how could they, why, but why? And a few of the things I came up with and you know, argued for were, for one thing, it gives meaning to a world where meaning is collapsing. Like here is a narrative that explains what's happening and why it's happening. And this narrative also gives them hope and a champion, you know, in the person of Donald Trump. And there's a bunch of things that I went through. I'm sure I can't quite reconstruct it right now, but if we understand, and then like a lot of it is dispossession, like a lot of the conspiracy theory universe is fueled by a breakdown of meaning and dispossession. Like part of the breakdown of the meaning is the dispossession because we were supposed to be better off than our parents. And as you're saying, except for the top 1%, most people are not better off than their parents, and they're getting worse and worse off. I mean, we all know how wealth inequality has widened, accelerated in the last year. So if that doesn't change, then essentially blaming the symptom is not going to reach the disease. And a lot of I actually spend quite a lot of time reading and watching conspiracy genre material because I think it's so important to understand where that's coming from. And another so I said a dark mirror. It's also a mirror of the breakdown of the legitimacy of our authorities. Like, what do you expect when the government corporate matrix has been lying to people and manipulating people for the last 50 years or more? Like, what do you expect when, I'm not going to I could go through examples of that, but, you know, from Iraqi weapons of mass destruction to Vioxx to, I mean, I can name a lot of examples, but just saying that when people don't trust you, the first question to ask is, have I betrayed their trust? Not what's wrong with them. They're not listening to teacher. So yeah. So it starts, I call it looking with eyes of reverence. Like you look at the person that you are judging for their stupid, idiotic views, and you say, and you think, how could a beautiful divine soul come to believe those things and to come to see the world in that way? What happened to them? Because with that understanding, then maybe you can meet the circumstances that generated that behavior. And maybe you can't. Maybe all you can do is protect the innocent from them. Like, I'm not saying that there's never a time to set a boundary or to engage in a fight, but what we have today is a worldview that casts everybody into enemies. Like, we're addicted to enemies. This comes out in US foreign policy too. It was a huge crisis after the Soviet Union collapsed. The military industrial complex, but really the whole nation had nothing no foil against which to define itself. And if you remember back then, first we've picked out Colombian drug lords as the new bad guy and kind of limped along with that until, 9/11 happened. And then we had a new bad guy that we could know ourselves in relation to. And, then it became Vladimir Putin, and, now it's a virus. Anyway, it's a pattern. So yeah, I won't say more about that now, but eyes of reverence. Yeah.
So, Charles, if we are looking into ourselves for our own journey and our path, then how do we make that connection to the other?
I'm not sure if I understand what you mean.
Well, if, to a certain degree, what you've been talking about is kind of, looking inward, or, listening to the heart, right? And in some ways, it's a very in-focus thing. And yet at the same time, our pathway is also about this interconnectedness. How do we reconcile these two, sort of the looking inward and the going outward?
Well, to me, it's both of these faculties they're really the same faculty. To listen to oneself is to cultivate that skill also cultivates the skill of listening to somebody else. I mean, how do we actually know the world or know another? It is through our senses. And if we pay attention to our senses rather than to our projections, then we will know the other as well. The reason that we do not know others and cannot empathize is that we are not actually seeing them. Instead, we're seeing a projection of our ideas about them, of our ideas about the world, of our prejudices. Like, how can you, and you've probably had conversations like that where it's like, hold on, is this guy even listening to me? Is this guy even looking at me? He's looking through me. So he's looking at a projection of me, not me. So I don't see that there's a conflict here. And ultimately, if you really do want to understand yourself, you need the mirror of the other people that come into your life. I mean, this is a basic, this is another pillar of the story of interbeing, that people mirror me, that my relationships express an aspect of myself. I can only learn about myself ultimately, even if I want to just be self-focused. I can't do that except through relationship, because I am relationship. So I'm not sure if that meets your question,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Well, it's interesting, as Yalies, we all know that we are supposed to make the world a better place. And that is a very interesting relationship to the title of your book, The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible.
Yes.
What do you think that statement then, as Yalies, that we need to be considering above and beyond what we may have learned at Yale?
Yeah. That brings up the question that you emailed me. Somebody emailed about hope, and isn't hope kind of a distraction from what is, or denial of what is? The title of that book was very deliberate. The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible. Hope is the premonition of a possibility. Authentic hope is not a delusion. It is a recognition of something that's possible. Our minds may not know what our hearts know. In fact, there's a million reasons why a more beautiful world isn't possible. It's impossible. It's never going to happen, because what about these people? What about those people? What about this impossible problem? What about that problem? It's too late. People are too greedy. It'll never work. It'll never happen. Like, the mind does not know what the heart knows. And if we're cut off from the heart's knowledge, then all of these efforts seem very futile. So to answer your question, I think if we want to enact our duty as Yalies to make the world a better place, We have to know that it is possible. We can't pretend to know and go through the motions, therefore, of making the world a better place. We have to know that it is possible so that we're serving something real, so that when others hear us speak of that possibility, they believe us because we've seen it ourselves. In order to see it, you have to look for it. In order to look for it, you have to know that it's there. So really, that's the purpose of the book, is to remind people of something that they know, or to awaken that knowledge in them. And for me, this knowledge, you know, I'm not Superman either. Like, I fall into despondency sometimes, where the book I wrote just seems like an empty promise. But what rescues me in those circumstances is that the future, the more beautiful world my heart knows is possible. And possible doesn't mean guaranteed. It means within our reach. It means that my actions, our choices, can bring about that world. Even if we don't know the path to get there, we know that there is a path. If we know that there is a path, then we can know to look for the path. We know to look for the guidance. And that's what that heart knowledge was about before, like the feeling of rightness and care. Like, yes, this is my next step. So the book is to remind or to awaken a knowledge that you already have, so that it can work within you, and you know, then you become attuned to it. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think you've been more than generous with your time and with your heart knowledge with us this evening. So I think, you know, we'll bring it to a close for tonight, unless there's something else that, you know, one more
I'm
thing.
getting a little tired too, so I think it's good. Yeah.
Well, we've been pulling at you, so it has been delight, and I hope that this has just given everybody a taste of what Charles has to offer, and that you will now be more curious and take a look at some of the other things he has to say. And I've been delighted that you are with us, and I'm so happy that we were able to have some really good and open discussions tonight. And I hope people will join Must See Yalies. Next week is going to be about biotech companies. The following week is going to be networking for the graduate school, and then ROMs, and then the human experience the next 2 months is going to be taken over by the Humanities in Action initiative in February and March. So watch this space for what we will have in April. So, and with that, I'd like to wish you all good evening, and thank you very much. Good night.